Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast where we bring guests to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. Our goal is to provide you with options for products, services, and knowledge that can help benefit you or your business. I'm Cher Downing, your host, and I want to welcome Steve Emanuel with Emmanuel Enterprise Corp. Hi, Steve. How are you today?
I'm good, Cher. Nice to be here.
So excited to have you here today because we're going to talk about a couple things that you're working with. The first is Emmanuel Ace, and I'm going to let you go in and explain that there in a moment, including the fact that for our listeners, ACE is AYCE, so pay close attention. And then we're also going to talk about your EM Digital focus, that is your newest adventure that's getting started. Because as our listeners know, it's all about trending and adapting to what's going on in our world right now. And what really excites me, my listeners know that I went to law school and did a master's degree. So I have a certain passion for the legal system, but also the fact that I'm excited that the legal system is now getting caught up into the current world of technology and utilizing it and really expanding for their students to have an even greater experience beyond just the legal education. So, Steve, I'm going to let you get started with telling us a little about Emmanuel Ace.
So I should say, Cher, as a background, that I'm trained as a lawyer, and for literally, this kind of amazes me, but for literally 48 years, I have been writing law school study aids that are sold under the name Emanuel Law Outlines, plus a couple of other lines like Emmanuel Crunch Time and Law on a Flash flashcards. So I've spent nearly 50 years trying to communicate to law students what they need to know to succeed in law school, principally from a substantive perspective. Okay, I'm helping you with contracts. Well, what's an offer? What's an acceptance? What happens when the acceptance diverges too greatly from the offer? Is there still a contract? Those sorts of things. That's been a largely text-based world. The business I founded, I sold to a large multinational publisher about 20 years ago, and I continue to update all these materials for them. That's now under the name aspenpublishing.com. But this newest venture consists of my licensing back from Aspen the rights to everything I've ever written and a fair amount of other law school study aid stuff that I didn't write, but that Aspen has been good enough to license to me. And we offer that under the website EmanuelAce.com. So, which I guess since this is an oral podcast only, I should perhaps spell it. So my name is Emmanuel, Emanuel, followed without punctuation by Ace, which is AYCE.com. And I guess I should mention that the way we came up with the ACE is that it's an acronym that stands for All You Can Eat. And the idea is that we have over 100 publications, and the full text search of these is available all as part of the low monthly subscription cost, which I think is less than $15. It's got the full text of all the kind of narrative materials. It's got thousands of questions, both multiple choice, and essay style questions, both long and short essay style questions. Got a lot of bar type questions, and we've integrated it all so that the student can get help for whatever they're studying either right now or for next week's exam. That part is not so totally innovative. I think the breadth of materials and the customized software we've developed for accessing those materials is pretty good and state of the art, but not groundbreaking yet. But there is stuff we're working on, and Cher, I guess many of the people who come on your show are talking about stuff they're working on that is not a finished product. And
absolutely,
listeners probably roll their eyes often, but this is fairly near term. A couple of things I'm going to talk about. The most exciting thing we're doing as part of Emmanuel Ace is this. Law school, like many disciplines, is teaching students to give free-form answers to questions. There are disciplines that can be adequately measured, proficiency in which can be adequately measured by answering multiple choice questions or doing computations, and the accuracy of the computations can be measured in an online system by whether you got the right answer, with the right answer being perhaps a number or some very short kind of response. Law, like many of the humanities and social sciences, is different in the sense that mastery of the subject and progress through learning the subject really needs to be measured by how a student writes a free-form answer to a question. And that free-form answer may sometimes be a fairly lengthy sentence, but it may also be a multi-paragraph or longer piece of writing, in essence, an essay. What the world has needed desperately, in my opinion, up till now, the educational world has needed a way of having a machine really digest and hopefully understand a student's free-form essay answer, compare it to a model answer prepared by the instructor who has composed the question, and give the student feedback, a sort of grading. And that grading can be of two different sorts, and we're making, we think, very good progress on both of those sorts. So one of those sorts is we ask the essay question, and I'll be talking a little bit later about our EM digital business, where it's a professor at a law school who will be asking the essay question rather than us as publishers. But in either event, there's a question. It requires typically at least a one-paragraph, fairly sophisticated answer, and often multiple parts. So in one mode, we evaluate the entire answer, and then we give a critique, and it's an interlined critique. In other words, we go to the first paragraph and maybe the first sentence and say, in brackets highlighted, I'm unclear what you mean by this. Do you mean this or do you mean that? A better way to have expressed it might be to say such. Then it goes on to the next sentence or paragraph, and is the kind of feedback you would get perhaps in graduate school, or if you're very, very lucky, maybe even in college, from an incredibly dedicated teacher or graduate assistant who would really read your essay, think about it, and do more than say just in the margin, good, confusing, or whatever. A real responsive piece of feedback that would kind of simulate what would happen in a meeting in office hours with your professor, where the professor is devoted enough to take your piece of writing and really critique it one-on-one using full sentences and asking your opinion. So that's mode one that we're working on. Obviously not an easy thing to do. There is little, if anything, out there, but we do think that the branch of technology being called generative AI, large language models, as reflected in ChatGPT and in things like GPT-4 and the Llama system that Meta has just released, those tools, which we're up to our eyeballs in working with on a highly technical basis, we are starting to see that we can give that kind of a feedback quite usefully, especially where we know what a model answer, a good model answer, or a less good answer to that particular question looks like.
That is so interesting, because right now we are with generational students who have grown up only with technology. And they have all of their social interaction on technology, but they also get all of their feedback on technology. And so it is a very natural occurrence for them to want to get additional feedback and to really understand the problem, where they could have done better, where things might have gone off kilter when they were writing. And you hear students talk about it all the time that, gee, they wish they got better feedback. They wish they got more feedback from their professor. They wish they knew what they did wrong. It says this could have been written better. Well, what does that mean? And so you're looking at really the marriage of both of those areas, but at a higher level than, say, something like generative AI, which is pulling from existing knowledge, right, wrong, or indifferent, and packaging it and pushing it out. You're actually looking at what is the best way to respond to this and to give them quality feedback. And that's a level above generative AI.
And it is, in fact, a very difficult technology problem. I'll tell you that I'm 72 years old, and therefore I'm old enough that I have a good fortune to have a 46-year-old son who, as a second career, started when he was 43, is getting a doctorate in machine learning from Harvard. And I talk to him all the time about this problem. And he was just telling me, and if you define the problem as not just echoing something back that seems to be pertinent, but instead has a fairly high indicium of reliability, i.e., it is not hallucinating, that's an extraordinarily difficult problem. He actually professes doubts about whether my present technology team of 3 or 4 full-timers with very advanced degrees, et cetera, spread all over the world, he doubts whether we can really produce reliable feedback in the way I'm describing. But he does agree that if the context is a particular essay question, something that is asking for a response to a particular question where we know what a model answer looks like, he, Michael, my son, is willing to concede that maybe we can get there with resources on hand, as opposed to a more general kind of problem where you ask the system to give you the answer to some legal question, like what are the elements of a valid federal complaint, where the risk of hallucination on the part of, let's say, ChatGPT is very large.
Absolutely.
So focusing on this narrower problem of responding to an essay question and coming up with a response that needs customized feedback, we're pretty confident that we're on the path to being able to be useful in the very near term, meaning within a month or two. So one of the modes is you complete the essay and we grade it with all this feedback, which is typically the way it would happen if you had the wonderful professor or teaching assistant of your dreams. The second that I think could really be more profound is a mode in which it helps you step by step compose your answer without giving the answer, but helping you structure the answer in a way that is consonant with that particular domain of study. So for instance, in legal essays, both in law school and for bar exams, for example, you're given a fairly complex set of facts, and then you're asked often a fairly open-ended question like, what torts have been committed by whom, and what defenses could be raised if those tortfeasors or potential tortfeasors were sued? So you have to do a lot of the structuring yourself as the student in those kinds of contexts. So there is a mode of analysis that's very well established in law schools called IRAC. It's been around at least since 48 years since I started legal study. IRAC, which stands for Issue, Rule, Application, and Conclusion. I don't think students are taught enough, especially early on, that is a good organizing principle. Professors who teach so-called doctrinal subjects, not how to do legal research or advanced litigation seminar, but the ones who teach the core subjects like torts, contracts, property, I think they don't adequately even instruct students about the concept of using IRAC to structure existing exam answers. But what we are doing is we're organizing around the IRAC structure. So what we would say in the case of a torts question, where the fact pattern indicates many torts committed by maybe up to 4 or 5 different characters with lots of defenses, potential defenses strewn throughout, but hidden in the fact pattern. What we might say to the student is, okay, pick an issue that you think is the first issue. Here, we've given you 1 period, state the issue. And then it would be up to the student to pick a good issue to start with. And if the student got stuck, we would be able to learn, the student would say, I'm stuck. And we'd say, okay, well, customarily in this kind of torts question, you would pick a potential tort and name it. So, and describe the issue surrounding it. So you might say, and this isn't pertinent to this particular fact pattern, but in general, if you saw something that looked like a battery in your fact pattern, you would write as your issue, did John Doe commit battery when he shoved a plate of food in the face of Bill Pritchard, with the D and the P indicating potential plaintiff and defendant? Usually law professors will give you that little bit of help in organizing your answer. So now, student, find the tort that seems to you most appropriate to start with, perhaps because it's the first one that emerged in the facts. Write an issue about that tort and a statement of an issue. Did so-and-so commit this tort when so-and-so did thus and such? So the student would write the answer, write the statement of issue. Did Doe commit a tort when he did thus and such to Patrick? Okay, good. That sounds like a pretty good statement, we would answer. Or that's a little confusing because you haven't told us enough about the issue, and maybe dreaming a little bit about what our potential would be. Did you mean to focus on when D picked up the plate of food and approached D, or are you concentrating on the act of shoving the food into P's face? You need to articulate in your statement of the issue with a little more precision. So then in this world that I think we can deliver, the student would rewrite the statement of the issue a little more precisely. And then the system would say, okay, that's good. Now, state the rule that you think, the substantive rule of law that you think best applies to answering this issue. And then the student would write, battery is defined as an action by the defendant that causes a harmful or offensive contact with the person of the plaintiff, period. That's probably enough as a statement of a rule. And then the system would say, yeah, that's a pretty good statement. Or if the statement was not so accurate, hopefully we would know enough to say, well, no, you didn't get the definition of battery quite right. You said that the definition is thus and such, but do you want to try again? Or here's a crisper definition taken from the Emmanuel Law Outlines on torts. Battery is thus and such. So why don't you now reformulate your statement of the rule? So in theory, then the student would, perhaps more or less copying what the prompt, would rewrite the statement of the rule. Then we'd say, okay, time for the application. This is the guts of your answer, of course. I mean, every student is going to recognize that the guts is largely the application of the rule to the facts. I mean, that is a reality. It's easier to state the rule, not so easy to get exactly the rule that's on point, not exactly easy to spot the issue, but the real guts is to be able to argue about how that rule is applied to the facts. And many issues tell you what side you're on. You are the potential plaintiff's lawyer or you are the defense's lawyer. So in our case of a particular essay that we know a lot about, we've got the model answer, we might remind the student, okay, so when you apply the law, the rule to the facts, remember, you're on the side of the defense. So phrase your answer in terms of, we should argue in defense that this is not a battery because the plaintiff consented or the plaintiff provoked or whatever. And then we'd say, yes, but customarily in an issue spotting exam, you want to recite the counter to what your client would say. So now that you've articulated how the defense should articulate this defense of consent. What are the counters that the plaintiff's lawyer could make? And then the student would write, but the plaintiff's lawyer can answer this by saying that there was not really in consent. Consent must be informed, and the plaintiff must have been given a real opportunity to decline to consent. And in these facts, neither of them was true. Plaintiff didn't do anything to consent to having a plate of food thrown in his face, and also didn't even have time to think about it, needed to react completely. So the defense of consent will not work here. And then we would take the student through the various torts, in this case, the various potential torts, the various application of the rule to the facts, especially as to defenses. And then for each tort and possible defenses, we would prompt the user for a conclusion. And the conclusion is typically of the form, I think the plaintiff would get the better of the combat on this point, because because this looks like it meets all the elements of battery, and the possible defenses of consent and provocation do not look like they will be persuasive. And then on to the next issue. So the opportunity to help the student structure an answer and react in real time as if we were preparing them for a mock trial proceeding or a mock appeal where they're interrupted by judges. I think this could be quite transformative for the way lawyers are prepared.
I think that is a perfect example of where we are going also in education in general. So for our listeners, if you haven't had a chance yet to play with ChatGPT, I always recommend choosing something simple. For example, if you type into ChatGPT and you say, tell me 5 ways to deliver a speech, it will generate 5 ways. It also has a regeneration button, and it will ask you, are you satisfied with those answers, or do you need to hear 5 different answers? You can regenerate as many times as you want. The point of it is the technology is helping us to have bigger considerations, broader access to thinking and how we are defining and aligning our thought process, and then also how we're going to move those forward to deliverables. That is something that we've needed in education across the board for a long, long time, because we've always set up for open thought thinking and process, but we've never really guided you in how to do it. In law school with IRAC, and I did use IRAC, it is quite helpful because you always have that sitting in the back of your mind. With dissertation students, we always formulate by chapters. So you always think in terms of, oh, this doesn't fit in this chapter, this needs to go in the next one or the previous one. But when we generally are training people to actually have open thought and present their thoughts and their arguments and their defenses, we really have not done a good job of aligning how that process works. And for lawyers, we do it, but we do it in a limited way when you're in a classroom, when you're in front of someone. And as we all know, we have some professors that are outstanding. We have some professors that are above average, and we have some that are average. And so students talk among each other and hear.
If I may interrupt you, are you asserting that we, meaning those who go to law school, rarely, if ever, have a professor who is below average? I would suggest that definitionally that is not possible, right? This is
no. We do. We see it.
Yeah. You know what I mean. Lake Wobegon, whatever it was called.
Yes.
Garrison Keillor, everybody's above average. That is distinctly not the case in law school. And indeed,
nor in any school. In any school.
And I can tell you, I think accurately, that in my 48 years of selling study aids, overwhelmingly my best customers are those, and you can choose the subject you want to buy a book in. Our ACE offering is different, but throughout this time, we publish individual titles like Contracts or Torts, and each of them now costs like $56, not a trivial sum. So students buy the book that they most want, and their definition of what I most want tends to correspond with who my most confusing professor is. That's not always the principal reason, but it often is. My person for Civ Pro is unbelievably confusing. And that happens a lot more often in civil procedure, by the way, than in torts, just by the nature of the strangeness of the subject to new law students. But yes, there are sub-average professors, of course, everywhere. And one of the things that may make a professor sub-average is just really confusing or lack of feedback. So this kind of structured tutoring, we think if we can carry it off, is going to be a game changer.
I think absolutely, because also we have different learning styles, and students that go into law school are not coming from a Socratic method of learning. So there's a shift in how you learn in law school and how you process that information. In addition to different learning styles, people learn in different ways. People learn in seeing the same information presented in different ways. So I think this has a real opportunity to impact the legal system in the beginning, but I think it has an opportunity to move into the education system as well. The technology is being used in a thoughtful process, but it has a humanistic quality, and it still has the focus of the legal quality for education that needs to be there.
Right. And there is, so one of our ideas, now we are not active beyond the law school side yet, but clearly one of our visions is that what we're doing here, in terms of especially the ability to read and critique free-form answers, ought to be of wide interest to any school or teacher/professor, where the posing of essays and the reading/grading/improving of those answers is a key part. And especially where it's not just make arguments from general principles and we'll see what a good arguer you are, but something of the more technical vein where there is a correct answer or range of answers. We think this technology, if we can carry it off, this grading and tutoring on the fly technology, will be important. Now, one of the issues is, of course, how do we, the system, know the right answer? Now, in what I've described to you so far, which is a quite tightly focused, prototypical issue spotting law school exam question, what torts have been committed, what defenses can be raised, not so hard for us to know what the correct answer is because we've got a model answer prepared, and we've also got a corpus consisting of my writings, for example, on the subjects and other stuff that we have that's copyrighted, proprietary, that we can draw on to respond. But what about more open-ended stuff? What about stuff where the professor, and I'm hypothesizing someone in the humanities, perhaps someone who wants to ask a question for an intro to American history around the time of the Civil War, would like to be able to ask some broad-based questions about, I can imagine, the causes of the Civil War. It's hard to critique the student's answer without some real sense of what scholars believe is a correct range of answers. Now, the professor might draft her own model answer, and we could help her set up the system so that what's in her model answer is pretty much the only thing being considered, and our technology really only adds the kind of conversational piece, the chat piece of ChatGPT, so we can understand the response and make kind of general comments about it. But the bigger domain in education, as elsewhere, is clearly going to be the domain of reliability. ChatGPT, as everybody now knows, vacuums up everything that's ever been on the web, plus about 10x more materials that don't even surface on the web, but have somehow been published up till November of 2022 or whatever the current cutoff is. And you can get horrible hallucinatory answers that appear to be utterly confident.
Yes.
I don't know if your listeners have seen the article that appeared within the last week in the New York Times about the lawyer who represented a plaintiff in an aviation case and prepared a brief solely by using ChatGPT. And it said, make me a brief to take the following positions. And this lawyer, it's a he, so I'm going to use the pronoun he, didn't want to take it entirely on trust. So his verification step consisted of asking the same ChatGPT engine, are your answers reliable? And the ChatGPT answered, yes, our answers are completely reliable. He submitted this brief, and it turned out it wasn't a little bit unreliable. It was almost completely hallucinatory. Every single case it cited, it's not just that he cited real cases that were kind of on point, but he mangled what they said a little bit. The system invented actual cases that have never existed and invented quotations from these cases that never existed. And it seems like even those quoted statements never existed, even in another case. So it couldn't be a worse handling, which is why it ended up on the front page of the New York Times. The judge basically sanctioned the lawyer. He will be forever. I don't know how long the rest of his career will be, but you can bet that if he's prominent enough to have an obituary in 30 years, it will mention this episode. So it illustrates the importance of having some level of confidence that the answer you got from your large language model generative AI system is likely to be correct. So we are working very intensely on that problem. It is a problem orders of magnitude greater than the problem of just taking a model answer and judging how close the student's answer is to that model, because it requires the ability to look at a large database, either everything that ChatGPT has, or more likely a database that we would build of, in our case, legal precedents, cases, statutes, regulations, and maybe some commentary, getting stuff from those sources and making sure that those are not contradicted by other sources and that they are on point. That's enormously difficult. I can't say when we'll get there. I think we will, or others will kind of get there. But within the whole category of having teachers be able to ask open-ended questions and give useful feedback to a free-form answer that might cite arguments or facts that have not been prepared by the teacher in a model answer, that's going to be, I think, very powerful. The form of question, what do you think were the leading causes of the American Civil War, when nothing in class explicitly covered that here are the 10 biggest factors. Instead, the student has had various readings, and the student might even cite those readings, and the professor doesn't want to have to make a model answer, even one that says the relevant readings are this source, that source, and the other source. Something that could read that essay, and the professor who has studied this area with a sense of, yeah, that's the kind of feedback that I would give someone who had been in my course and answered that question, which involved stuff that wasn't expressly spoon-fed in the lectures. If we could deliver that, help the professor deliver that, I think that would be big. Not saying we can get there with the generic tool, but that's what we're thinking about.
Well, I think one of the great things about innovation is always learning from what we're working on and learning with what we're doing. I think your goals are fantastic for that. And obviously, I think it's something that would be welcome into the classroom easily. And I know students definitely would have an interest in it, because students have always had an interest for years with Cliff Notes and guides and supplemental workbooks. And we've always bought those things and utilized those things because there was a gap of some sort in what we were learning, either in how we were learning it, what was being delivered, or time constraints. And we just didn't get through all of the material that was necessary. But, the age old, well, we bought a test bank and the questions are in there and no one's removed the questions, so you need to learn that portion on your own, still exists even in our undergraduate levels. So I think this is a fantastic goal. We'll be excited to follow back up with you down the road and see how things are going on it. But I want to shift gears a little bit now, because that's just not enough for you to work on. You have a whole nother project that you're working on with EM Digital, which really is focusing more on what faculty are doing and how you're able to help them carry out a message, both visually, audially, but also just how to really supplement their own work that they're already doing. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with EM Digital.
Okay, well, that's a great lead-in, better formulated than I could have done, Chair. Law schools have always been primarily, indeed overwhelmingly, in the business of offering JD programs, and those JD programs are residential. In other words, it's a 3 or 4 year degree program, 4 years if it's part-time, 3 years if it's the standard American Bar Association accredited curriculum. And everybody just about wants to go to an ABA accredited law school, except for the special case of California, which isn't worth going into here. But that's got several major limitations, that traditional approach. One of them is that law schools don't want to be limited to JD programs. And although they have long offered LLM programs that build upon a JD degree, like the fairly well-known tax programs, where you've gotten your JD and now you want to become a specialist in tax. So you take typically a 1 year, maybe 2 year supplemental course in LLM of taxation, maybe from a famous law school. I guess the prototype is the NYU LLM in tax, where at least around here, anybody who's really a tax lawyer is likely to have done that on top of their law degree. But law schools now want to offer standalone LLMs, where the person taking it does not necessarily have a JD. So a standalone 1 year course in compliance with securities regulation, or intellectual property, or sustainable development, or environmental law and practice. There are a lot of those. Those are typically offered to working students. And the conventional approach, even for those standalone masters, is you show up at the law school in a residential sense. You have maybe 2 courses you're taking per semester, and you show up at the law school on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings for a 2-hour block, one for each course. The school has to do it typically after hours because people are working, but it's got still the disadvantage that they have to be able to commute. First of all, they have to be near enough the law school to commute, and their schedule has to be such that they can show up all at the same time for a 7 o'clock class that is required, a required course. So law schools are increasingly interested in bringing much of this online, both the JD and the standalone LLM programs. And they are interested in 2 different types of experiences. One they call a hybrid, and the other they call, I guess, a standalone or non-residential program. In a hybrid, a residential hybrid, maybe you go to class several days a week, but then there's meaningful stuff online that you view on your own. When that is translated to the online world, what there generally is a hybrid in the following sense. None of it is residential, because the law schools are very eager to offer a degree where you don't have to come there, every week or every other week, even if some of the stuff is online. These are entirely online programs. But there is a distinction between asynchronous and synchronous learning. So as many of you may know, in education, the idea of a synchronous offering is something essentially analogous to a Zoom conversation. The professor and the students are there all in real time at the same time. The professor speaks, the students can ask questions, the professor can ask questions of the students or a particular student. Professor sees which students are present and can call on them. So there, what the law firm needs to do is not so innovative compared with what they're already doing. I mean, the model is we're going to conduct this live course, except you're not going to be sitting in class. You're simply going to be in a Zoom call with the professor. And in many law schools, it's actually a Zoom call per se, using the tools and only the tools that come with Zoom, which are pretty good for this sort of purpose. But nobody pretty much is offering, no law school that I know of is offering a synchronous only course, because the big market for these courses is people who work during the conventional day and or people in other time zones. So in either of those events, the law school cannot count on people being all able to attend a Zoom call and participate in it at a designated time. So that's why for pretty much all of these courses, the law school needs to offer an asynchronous dimension. And typically what an async course consists of is a lecture by the professor. Typically there is a visual element. In other words, it's a audio-video lecture, not an audio-only lecture. Typically, it's not just the professor standing in front of a camera so that you see the talking head. It tries to use technology somewhat more aggressively than that. So typically, there is a series of more or less slides, PowerPoint slides. That's at least the starter model for these courses, where the course consists of an audio on top of a slideshow, maybe with the professor's live at the time of recording image shown in the lower right-hand corner, let's say, so that you do get a sense that the professor is this human who is talking to you. You see her mouth move, you read the slide, it's all synchronized so that when the slide has 4 different bullet points and the professor shifts from bullet point 1 to bullet point 2, the slide shifts and the timing matches what the professor is saying. Well, as those of you who have tried to prepare these kinds of things in an async way know, that's not so easily done. So what we find is that when a law school wants to offer an entire hybrid curriculum for a JD, also for a master's, but let's take the core case of the JD, where the law school has to offer something on the nature of 5 or 4 courses times each of 3 full years or 6 semesters, maybe 8 semesters. So you're talking about probably 24 courses, each of which is 3 course hours per week. You're talking about a very large amount of stuff. And even the professor who is teaching, let's say, contracts is going to have to deliver 3 hours of material times 12 weeks at a minimum, which is 36 credit hours for 36 asynchronous hours to support the asynchronous part of let's call it a 3 credit, 39-hour course. How does the professor make all those visuals? The professor, of course, could use PowerPoint herself and could write a script herself and could master the art of recording it, even perhaps with help from the law school's own audio-visual department. But the burden largely follows on the professor, and not so many professors, in order to accommodate the school by teaching 1 online semester course per year in contracts, in addition to, let's say, that professor's 3 live courses during the year. Lots of professors will not want to do that, and the law school will not want to have to make a deal with the professor whereby the professor creates all this stuff in return for teaching one course less or whatever. So like many education technology providers, we are set up to have instructional designers, IDs. And in the case of law school, these are sometimes lawyers, but for the most part are non-lawyers, but with some experience working with law professors in the creation of teaching materials. So the ID is a specialist in figuring out with the professor what the visual component would look like. So the ID person would say, okay, here's a format for PowerPoint slides that tends to work fairly well for courses generally, or maybe even contracts specifically. Here's how we do the titles. How we do the lead in 1 or 2 sentences covered by the slides. Here's how we do the first and second bullet point. Here's how we transition. So you, Ms. Professor, why don't you go and divide the course up into chapters and then do some drafts of the 10 PowerPoints to lead with. We can tell you from our experience that a pace of something like 1 slide per minute tends to be fairly good on average, though it can gust to 1 every 2 minutes and go down to 1 every 40 seconds, but somewhere within that is about what should be covered on a slide. Why don't you prepare your bullet points and then for a different slide or 2, prepare a hypo question that you're going to ask as if you were teaching Socratically, and then prepare an answer slide where you go over the answer to that particular hypo. So let's do that for, you say you want to start with offer and acceptance, and you, Ms. Professor, have determined that you want to start with what is an offer versus something that might look like an offer but isn't an offer, like an advertisement addressed to the public, or a statement of willingness to negotiate, but not, here's something which you, the recipient, can turn into a contract by accepting it. So let's imagine, Ms. Professor, that you want to spend an hour on what is an offer. We think you will want to have somewhere between 40 and 60 slides, though perhaps less if you're going to be doing an synchronous piece also, but whatever. If you want to spend 30 minutes on what is an offer before you get to what is an acceptance, then why don't you write the requisite number of slides, somewhere between 15 and 30, that lay out the substantive points and the hypothetical questions and the answers. Submit your draft to me, the ID, and I'll help you work it into a slide that has the right number of words on it, has the right layout, doesn't try to cram too much into any given slide. And if you want to deliver this from a script, then send me your draft script to go along with these slides, and I'll work with you on maybe punching up the script, and I'll help you figure out where you transition between each bullet point on a given slide and where you turn to the next slide. I'll help you figure out about how you're going to go back and forth among slides when you do the final broadcast. Those sorts of technical assistance to somebody who is not used to offering a course with this extreme technology focus. And our experience has been that it takes crazy amounts, a crazy ratio of minutes or hours of instructional designer time for each minute or hour of polished asynchronous content. So an hour of content will often take 20 hours or more of instructional designer work, much of it spent with the professor, to end up with the slides and script that are ready to go to be recorded. Professors who set down this road tend not to believe that. And my colleague and partner, Mike Gregory, who's been in this business of helping law schools start online programs for several years under a different corporate entity, has had lots of experience in persuading the law school and the professors, yeah, you think this is 5 hours of instructional design per hour of delivered material, but you're just incredibly far off. It's between 20 hours and 50 hours per hour. And if you want a fixed price from us, which we're happy to give, just know that we're computing it on the basis of 20 hours. And if we go over, that's our problem, not your problem. So why don't you sign a contract with us that will help you do the first year of an online program with 5 or 6 predefined subjects, 5 or 6 lecturers that you pick or that we find for you. We'll supervise everything, including the recording. And that's the whole batch of services that we are selling to you. That even using basic stuff like basic slides of the sort that might have been usable in 1995 and recording videos over the slides and delivering them with technology that might have been okay in 2000, that's still a business helping the law firm help its designated faculty members convert to this asynchronous world in which much, but not all, maybe of their content is going to be transmitted. Then we help with the other piece of the coin, which is the assessments, the essay questions, the multiple choice questions, the processing of the answers, the scoring of the answers, the setting up of interim stages during the semester where the professor can offer how are you doing assessment, which maybe won't count towards the grades, or maybe a graded assessment that will count towards the grades. We'll offer the final in this mode. Professor's still going to have to grade the answers that are not multiple choice, but we help with the learning system pieces of compiling grades, compiling scores on individual quizzes, helping revise quiz questions that don't look like they're working. So that whole piece, that assessment piece, is also a major piece of what we do. None of that is very high tech by today's standards, but we find that law schools typically need help, even in that relatively low tech piece of making these asynchronous lectures, making questions, exams that can be administered online, and then processing all the sort. We, of course, hope to get pretty soon to the next dimension, which is during the course, the professor won't give you a multiple choice question, won't give you an essay that the professor or an assistant has to read, but will instead give you a question and have the system grade your answer and will then report to the professor, well, here's a set of the answers the students came up with. Here's how we grade each answer. And in the not too distant future, here's what we think your students in the aggregate are finding confusing in this area. So you may want to go back over that area of what is an offer, acceptance, and completed contract. But I'm not saying we can do that today in EM Digital any more than we can do it on Emmanuel Ace. But that's part of the business plan. And today we can help with the entire asynchronous piece, curriculum design, and getting the law school up and running with their program. Plus, we can aid with the marketing piece and the student recruitment piece so that we can, if the law school desires, we can front the money to go out and find students, recruit them, deliver them to the admissions department, which makes the decisions. And then from there, we can take up the actual curriculum stuff. So again, that's a model we think that is amenable to non-law school schools that want to offer online programs where they may not presently be in that business, or they're in that business in a sort of halfway basis where they're maybe offering stuff on Coursera, but the law school, the school has to recruit the students, sign them up, and get them into the program. So vision for EM Digital in what I could call stage 2 is to help non-law schools offer similar, probably professional level online courses. A big agenda, not to be realized in the next year, but that's our thinking.
And again, innovation and looking at what are the pockets and the niches that are out there is what we're all about. And that's how our programs grow throughout higher education and throughout specialty schools, is taking that step forward and looking at what's next and really disrupting how we've always done it. Specialty programs, when you think of law, medical, all of those kinds of areas, we've always left them alone, so to speak, and we've practiced new innovation in other areas, but we've not always changed how we teach in those areas. And so this is really exciting to hear. And I know for our law communities, it's something that's on their mind all the time is how can they improve their programs? How can they help their faculty? And particularly when some of the best and brightest faculty you bring in are coming from a law firm, not from a teaching background. The very reason you're hiring them is their expertise and their knowledge and the things that they have done in the legal system. But it's often hard for them to translate and articulate that into what we term a traditional classroom and into an online classroom, even more so.
Right. And that tends to be even truer of the upper year courses.
Yes.
Which in a residential program are often taught by adjuncts.
Absolutely.
Right. As it just to illustrate timeliness of this discussion, I was just at my, it's frightening to even say it, but I was at my 50th college reunion this past weekend at Amherst College. And I was talking to a gentleman whose career has essentially been, I don't know that it paid all the bills, but it's paid most of the bills in his life, to be a state rep in the Maryland legislature for 41 years. And he is an adjunct professor teaching only a seminar on legislation, developing and enacting legislation at the two law schools in Maryland, I think both of which are in Baltimore. So he is not teaching a traditional doctrinal course. He is, of course, a lawyer by training, and he is a super, super expert in how you draft legislation, how you get it passed, and how lawyers can participate in that process, whether they're in the legislature or in some support or lobbying function. But yes, he was talking about the issues involved in being, in essence, a part-time volunteer who has to teach this quite esoteric stuff that the students in this second or third year semester are not really ready for. They've studied the doctrinal subjects, contract torts or whatever, but they know virtually nothing about how a bill gets drafted in a state or even federal legislature, or how you respond to lobbyists, how you perform lobbying functions. All of that is totally outside the curriculum. And he has to now turn that into a course. Right now, he actually had the experience of doing it synchronously, but online during COVID. And that's a familiar theme, I think, to many of your listeners. They didn't set out to do online synchronous, but COVID forced them to do it. So they know something about what it's like doing a live synchronous COVID-motivated Zoom-style course. But perhaps they'd like to do even that better, but they know nothing about how to deliver materials asynchronously, which requires much, much more preparation. So yes, he was illustrative of the kind of adjunct professor who has special expertise, but is not a career professor at that school, law school or otherwise, and needs help in pedagogy, even though that person is a super, super expert in the materials being taught from a practitioner perspective.
Absolutely. And so I think today's discussion has been all about really the things that we always focus on, which is education, introducing technology, navigating this. And I always say education has become a business because we really do have to formulate how we offer things, how we make it intriguing to students. Part of the whole recruitment process is picking a school that meets your needs, that provides what you want, that offers things in the delivery method that you choose. All of these things come together. So, Steve, I want to thank you so much for being on today. This has been exciting, and I'm excited to share this out with the law community as well as everyone else. For our listeners, as you know, as always, we will include Steve's website address and contact information so that you can reach out to him if you have questions or want to know more about what they're working on. And we'll certainly do a follow-up with you next year and kind of gauge where you're at. I want to thank all of our listeners today for being with us. We'll have the information out, and you can pick that up on Spotify or wherever you normally stream your podcasts. So until next time, thanks for everyone to attending, and keep learning.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.